Hello and welcome to part 3 of machining rep reblades. In this part I'll be going over finishing the blades as well as some assembly and final touches. The reblades have now been machined and surface ground and are ready for their first assembly. Bow song assembly is reasonably simple. It includes a bushing, which I'm putting in the blade now, and then 2 washers that go over the top of that bushing. You then put the handle over the knife and try and get everything lined up. I then use a pivot needle from Indiana John to line all the hardware up. In other words, it can be an absolute nightmare to get the pivot in. As you can see here, I'm even having trouble with a pivot needle, and I've assembled these knives hundreds if not thousands of times. I then go ahead and put the pivot onto the pivot needle and finish pushing everything through. You then put the screw into the knife, tighten everything down, and if everything went properly, it should swing freely. In this case, it did not swing freely. I do address that later. When things aren't working properly, the first thing to check is the bushing, because that is the most critical dimension. If the bushing is undersized or if the blade is oversized, then things will bind. The problem ended up being the bushing was oversized. I checked the wrong bushing right here, and that's how I got confused. I ended up replacing that bushing, and everything started swinging freely and working properly. Sadly, I lost the audio for this clip and some other clips during this video, so you aren't able to hear what the knife would sound like. Now it's time to finish grinding in all the handle gap. As you can see in the last clip, the handles are quite wide, and so in this process, bring in those final dimensions and add some finishing features such as a sharpening choil. This is a super important process that allows me to get everything perfectly and assemble everything. Now that all the final dimensions have been ground in and everything is machined, it is time to start finishing the blades. The next step in this process is to mask off the places on the blades that I do not want acid etched. I'm only acid etching 2 blades. In this batch, I normally acid etch about half of my blades though. So I use these little O-ring protectors that go in the blades and over the holes that keep the ferric chloride out of sensitive areas. Now that the protectors are on, there is one more step. It is time to bead blast the blades. Bead blasting them cleans up any residue that's on them that keeps the acid from etching the blades. It also makes them more uniform, and it comes out with a more uniform etch. I will be bead blasting the rest of the blades from this batch. Some of them are bead blast finishes, and some of them I just do before buffing. Bead blasting is a very satisfying and uniform process that helps strip off any coats or anything that's in your way, and it also makes a very even finish. Now that the blades have been blasted, it is time for them to get etched, so I go ahead and put them in the ferric chloride acid. Because I'm etching stainless steels, I use a relatively strong solution. Instead of the normal 3:1 ratio, I'm using basically pure ferric chloride. Now that the blades are done etching, you can see that they're very uniform, and it is now time to take off the protecting O-rings. After I take the protective O-rings off, I then put a coat of oil over the blade to help darken it and protect it. After acid washing the blades, the next step is to stone wash them. I just use some aquarium rocks and an old bucket with some soap water for this process. When stone washing, you want to shake the rocks in a circular motion instead of just back and forth, so you get a more uniform finish. After about a minute of stone washing, go ahead and take your blade out and see if it has reached the desired finish. If you would like it more stone washed, go ahead and put it back in and go for another minute or so. But if you would like it less stone washed, the only thing you can do is repeat the process. Now that the stone wash is finished, you can see that it has a much softer look to it, and it's just a finish I much prefer over a plain acid wash. The next step in the process is to buff the blades that are getting a buffed finish. Buffing helps remove heat treat colors and just leaves them with a nice shiny finish. Now you can see what the blades look like with the buffed finished. Sadly, it's mostly out of frame, but it does have a very shiny and uniform finish. Now that the blades are all but done, it is time to go ahead and put an edge on them. I use my belt grinder and a reasonably aggressive belt, 120 grit, to establish the edge. I make sure to do uniform back and forth motions to keep the edge even, and flip it over to make sure it doesn't veer towards one side of the blade. Now that all the blades are finished and have edges on them, they are ready for their final inspections. These are the blade shapes and finishes that I did for this batch. On this one, I did a little hand grind as a customer request, and on this one, I left it as a heat treat finish so you can see what that looks like. I'm going to show a couple pictures of customer made reps, and that'll be the end of the video. Thank you for watching. If you stuck around this long, please consider liking and subscribing.